Well, we know that Satan and his world constantly throw things at us, temptations, wrong thinking, and so on. So it's just like you're driving in a vehicle and someone jumps out in front of you or an animal runs across the road. That's when we need those brakes. But how do we apply them? How does our godly fear help us? Well, let's turn to the book of 2 Corinthians and see a very interesting point that is mentioned to the brothers back there in Corinth. So 2 Corinthians chapter 10, and we're going to look at verse 5. Now, the context of this chapter is where Paul is talking about wrong teachings. But the principle, as outlined in this verse, can be applied also to our reaction to wrong thoughts and immoral thoughts, or all sorts of things that are not in harmony with Jehovah's will. So let's see if we can see what the principle is. 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 5. For we are overturning reasonings and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. And we are bringing every thought into captivity to make it obedient to the Christ. So do we see the point? No matter what sort of thought it is, if it's an immoral thought, a temptation to do something wrong, something that's not neutral with regard to the political situation, what does it say here? We have to react quickly. It's just as if we put on the brakes. Yes, we have to overturn all these sort of things that could be going on in our mind.
So, Geoffrey Jackson is here using the concluding talk on the Friday of the 2021 convention to warn Jehovah's Witnesses against, among other things, wrong thinking.
Well, we know that Satan and his world constantly throw things at us, temptations, wrong thinking, and so on.
Yes, if you've never been one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you probably didn't know this, but when you're a witness, it turns out it's possible to have wrong thoughts, or in other words, be guilty of thought crime.
No matter what sort of thought it is, if it's an immoral thought, a temptation to do something wrong, something that's not neutral with regard to the political situation, what does it say here? We have to react quickly. It's just as if we put on the brakes. Yes, we have to overturn all these sort of things that could be going on in our mind.
It's something you never really think about when you're a witness, but when you're on the outside and you have the chance to look back on your time as a follower of people like Geoffrey Jackson, you realize how absurd it is that you can have such a thing as wrong thinking. How can your very thoughts be wrong? How can you control or be held accountable for basically what amounts to electrochemical signals firing away in your brain, which you don't really have any control over? Your brain will do its own thing, but all it takes is for a certain combination of electrochemical reactions and you've committed a sin. You've done something wrong. You're guilty of wrong thinking. And in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, this wrong thinking can manifest itself in, for example, doubting the religion, doubting the authority of people like Geoffrey Jackson. And Jackson's solution is to invoke 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 5, where it talks about overturning reasonings and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. How do you overturn reasonings? How do you overturn arguments against your faith, against your cherished beliefs, by ignoring them, by pretending they're not there, by resorting to denialism? This would be my question to any Jehovah's Witnesses who happen to be watching this video. First of all, how can thought crime be a thing? How can you be guilty of doing something wrong just because of the thoughts that are going on in your brain? And second of all, how can you reasonably be expected to overturn arguments against your faith without confronting them, without finding out what they are and deciding for yourself whether these arguments against your faith make logical sense.
We need to keep testing. Yes, we need to keep proving that we are in the faith. In other words, keep checking that we really are Christians, that we are really living up to what we believe and what we teach others to do. But remember, what is it that can be a problem for us? Well, again, if we turn to the book of Corinthians, this time 1 Corinthians, chapter 10 and verse 12, we'll see what the problem can be. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12. Let the one who thinks he is standing beware that he does not fall. Yes, just thinking everything is okay, there's no problems, thinking that we're just going on fine without testing ourselves and proving that we're in the truth, that can be a problem. Just like lack of maintenance to a vehicle can result in not only damage with regard to the vehicle, but also loss of life. How important then it is that we continue to keep testing whether or not we are in the faith or in the truth.
Well, it's taken combing through more than 6 hours of footage so far in this convention. We're now at the end of the Friday of the convention, this being a 3-day convention. It's taken 6 hours of footage, but I finally have something in this convention, the 2021 Powerful by Faith Convention, that I agree with. Geoffrey Jackson has said something here that makes total sense. Jehovah's Witnesses should absolutely keep testing whether they are in the true faith.
Yes, we need to keep proving that we are in the faith. In other words, keep checking that we really are Christians. How important then it is that we continue to keep testing whether or not we are in the faith or in the truth.
Again, similar to what I said about overturning reasonings, how are Jehovah's Witnesses supposed to do this practically without truly testing whether their beliefs stand up to scrutiny, without having full access to all of the older publications, and without reviewing these publications, including eyes-only publications that only the elders are allowed to read? How are Jehovah's Witnesses supposed to find out whether theirs is the one true religion without fully and comprehensively analysing their beliefs, including listening to what the other side has to say, listening to what apostates and former members have to say? How can you possibly be able to convince yourself that yours is the truth if you bury your head in the sand whenever anyone criticises Geoffrey Jackson, whenever anyone criticises the organisation and its handling of abuse, and its teachings regarding shunning, and its teachings regarding domestic violence, and its teachings regarding blood? If all you ever do is bury your head in the sand or listen to one side of the argument, how is this a proper test? Can you imagine if scientists operated in this way? Can you imagine if they didn't use the scientific method of experimentation, of questioning their hypotheses, if they just came up with a theory and just asserted it as fact and wouldn't allow anyone to say anything different, wouldn't allow any kind of experimentation to find out whether their theories really stood up to scrutiny? There would be no scientific progress. That's the sort of backwards, regressive attitude that people like Geoffrey Jackson and his colleagues stand for. He may pay lip service to testing whether you're in the faith, but we all know that if this test of whether you're in the faith turns out being negative, in other words, you find out you're not in the faith, you're not in the truth, things will very quickly deteriorate for you. This is an organisation that goes out of its way to punish people who come to the conclusion that they are not in the truth and decide to do something about it. So I was incredibly perplexed that Geoffrey Jackson included this language towards the end of his talk. Yes, I agree with it. I just find it incredibly hypocritical, because it's one thing saying, keep testing whether you're in the faith, keep testing whether you're in the truth. But again, when you're actively punishing people who do that, who follow this advice and decide that it's not the truth, that makes you a two-faced hypocrite.